China's winning the trade war, America started. In April 2025, Trump announced massive tariffs and promised to bring manufacturing home from China. China fought back. They immediately stopped buying American soybeans, and in October, they announced restrictions on rare earth exports. In response, Trump threatened 100% tariffs. But on the 30th of October, the two leaders met in South Korea. Trump dropped his threats. Both sides agreed to a one-year ceasefire instead. Trump backed down from the trade war he wanted. Here's why. A trade war is all about who has the leverage and who can take more pain. China wins in both, but their victory might come at a very heavy cost that I'll talk about later. For now, let's start with the leverage. China has a complete stranglehold over the critical materials that America needs, and they know it. Take rare earths, for example. There are elements needed to build all sorts of electronics, your phones, cars, even missiles. China mines about 60% of them. But here's what actually matters. They refine 91% of them globally. What's the difference? Mining is digging the raw rocks out of the ground. Refining is processing them into usable materials. China built the infrastructure to do so over decades. Everyone else didn't. If China stopped selling their processed rare earths, factories around the world will shut down, which means they can hold the world economy hostage if they want. China also refines 90% of the world's graphite and 70% of lithium. Both are needed to make batteries. So your laptop, electric car, grid storage, it all runs on materials processed in China. And medicine, your antibiotics, vitamins, ibuprofen, there's a good chance the ingredients are from China. These are all unglamorous little things that make modern life actually work, and almost all of it flows through China. That's why they have all the leverage over America in this trade war. We saw this play out when China announced they were restricting exports of rare earths in early October, requiring anyone who wanted to buy them to register for export licenses. You have automakers warning they might have to halt production lines. You have militaries scrambling to figure out which weapons systems use Chinese rare earths. Spoiler, it's most of them. Trump had no choice but to back down, as we just saw, because he and his team knew China held all the cards. But what Trump really wants is for America to build their own supply chains and not rely on China for anything critical. The problem is, those take years to actually build. You can't just open a rare earth processing facility tomorrow. Where's the infrastructure? Where's the engineers? And don't forget the regulatory approvals. Meanwhile, China's leverage is working today. So Trump has no choice but to back down from his tariff threats. China's winning, but every time they flex this power, they're reminding the world that depending on them is dangerous. They can lock you out whenever you get on their bad side. So what's happening is that the world is building their own escape routes out of the current reliance on China. Europe launched its Critical Raw Materials Act in 2024, trying to build their own infrastructure for rare earths, lithium, and battery materials. Japan locked in contracts with Australian mining companies all the way to 2038. India's building rare earth processing plants and cutting deals everywhere, potentially even to mine in Afghanistan. Companies are trying to move production out of China. In just the first half of 2025, about $46 billion more in investment left China than came in. That's the highest net negative in decades. So yeah, China has maximum leverage right now in the trade war. But in about a few years, when all these alternative supply chains are actually built, the leverage of theirs starts to disappear bit by bit. In a sense, China's winning by proving exactly why the world needs to stop depending on them. And the only reason this leverage of theirs works is because China can absorb economic pain like no one else. Because the reality is, China's economy is struggling right now. University graduates can't get jobs. Official youth unemployment sits around 19%. Most experts think the real number's closer to 30%. Property values are down 30 to 40% in major cities. And for most Chinese families, their home is their entire life savings. They're seeing deflation in the economy, so prices are falling instead of rising. Here's why that's a problem. When prices fall, people expect them to fall further, so they wait to buy. But when everyone waits, companies make less money, so they lay off workers. Those workers have even less money to spend, so prices fall even more as nobody's buying stuff. It's a cycle that feeds on itself. And all these are just scratching the surface of the problems China has. In most democracies, this kind of economic pain leads to protests in the streets. If there are elections, the angry voters will be voting out the ruling party. But there's no election to lose for Xi Jinping and the Communist Party. There's no way for citizens to change governments if they are seeing their lives aren't getting better. And the state controls the narrative of what's going on here. They can say America is trying to contain China's rise. The trade war is about stopping us. That's probably true in some ways, but it also plays into the nationalism that people feel, which is genuinely a very powerful feeling. The enemy here for them is America, and the Chinese government can very easily blame their problems on the trade war. Let's compare that to what happens in America. Take the example of soybean farmers who were victims of the trade war. China used to buy more than half of all American soybean exports. Then they slapped tariffs on American soybeans and started buying from Brazil and Argentina. American farmers had to watch their biggest customer disappear overnight while sitting on huge harvests with no buyers. Soybean prices were down 40% from 3 years ago. Farms were going bankrupt. So these farmers did what good citizens in a democracy would do: complain to their representatives, to the media. So political pressure ramped up, and Trump's now forced to do a bailout for these poor farmers. Here's the key difference, and it's why China will always win this trade war back and forths. Those soybean tariffs by China put Trump in a weaker negotiating position in the trade war, because he's actually vulnerable to the pain of voters as he's a leader of a democracy. He can't just ignore voters and try to do whatever it takes to outlast China in the trade war. But if Chinese factory workers get laid off, they can't vote anyone out, they can't even organize mass protests. The government would just suppress them immediately if they go on the streets and use their complete control of the media to frame things however they want. Xi Jinping doesn't have to worry about his approval rating dropping before an election. How are you going to win against a system that can keep absorbing pain and keep on fighting? There's no way. But here's where China's victory becomes a trap. Think about what China actually needs right now. They need to tackle unemployment. They need to boost household income. It's currently around 40% of the economy compared to 60% in other developed countries. They need to expand the social safety net so that people stop hoarding cash out of fear. Basically, shift power and resources from the state to regular people. But that's not what's happening. The Communist Party had a big meeting in late October called the 4th Plenum, where they kind of set the country's direction for the next 5 years. The priorities coming out of it are technological self-reliance, manufacturing strength, industrial dominance. Yes, they acknowledge that weak consumption and welfare are problems, but they gave no real plan to fix them. Because to the Chinese government, industrial and manufacturing strength are what matters. Strong factories mean China has leverage in the trade war, and a real war. That's more important than fixing economic problems that affect the regular people. The trade war justifies this strategy perfectly. They can say, America is trying to stop our rise. We need to be self-reliant. We need stronger industries. But this strategy has already created what experts call overcapacity, which just means China already makes too much stuff. Let's take electric vehicles. China can now produce 25 million electric vehicles in a year. To put that in perspective, The entire global car market is about 90 million vehicles a year, and that's all types combined: gas, hybrid, electric, everything. That means Chinese electric vehicles alone could supply more than a quarter of every car sold in the world. But here's the problem. Chinese electric vehicle makers are not making money. Their profit margins collapsed from 2.7% in 2019 to 0.83% in 2024. They're selling at cost or below cost just to move the cars they're making. That's not sustainable at all. It's the same with solar panels. China produced 588 gigawatts worth in 2024. Domestic demand was only 277 gigawatts. So what happens to all that excess? It has to be exported. There's no other option. And that's exactly what's happening across the board. China's electric vehicle exports doubled in September 2025 compared to 2024. They're flooding global markets with cheap products because they have to. And the Communist Party is totally fine with this. They want to have their market share. They think that industrial dominance gives them leverage, and it has so far. They're betting that other countries will keep on buying, but it turns out the other powers have their own plans. In October 2024, Europe hits Chinese electric vehicles with tariffs of up to 45%. They know that Chinese government money was artificially lowering prices, and that isn't fair to their own European car companies. But this is where the conflict shifts. It's not just about tariffs anymore. In 2022, America passed two massive bills, the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act. The Inflation Reduction Act authorized nearly $900 billion in spending and tax breaks for clean energy like electric vehicles and batteries. The CHIPS Act put $52 billion into semiconductor manufacturing. Europe saw what America was doing and said, we need to do the same thing. February 2025, they launched the Clean Industrial Deal to build out their own clean tech industry and not rely on China. This is industrial policy. Instead of just taxing Chinese imports, other powers are spending hundreds of billions building their own factories. The fight isn't just about tariffs anymore. It's about building your own production capacity to escape Chinese dominance. And China's caught in a really tough position. They need to export their overcapacity to keep factories running and the economy growing, or else they're stuck with dead stock and companies will go bankrupt. Imagine lines of unsold electric vehicles sitting at factories. China can't have that. The economy will collapse. But every major power is racing to build alternatives to China, not blocking Chinese imports outright, by spending billions to produce their own local alternatives. It's a very slow process. China still dominates manufacturing by a long shot, but the direction of moving away from China is clear. Meanwhile, back home in China, you still have the same economic problems. Winning the trade war doesn't fix any of that. So yeah, China can outlast America's tariffs. They can endure the pain. But let me know what you think about the future of this trade war. Has China won? Is the cost of victory too high? How about the American side? Can they successfully move away from relying on China? Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these insane times. To me, the trade war may be a foregone conclusion, but the industrial war is just beginning, as everyone else is starting to realize the dangers of relying on China. And this isn't just about America. China's been weaponizing trade for years. Japan, South Korea, and Australia, for example. And every single time, it backfired the same way. I actually made a full video breaking that down, so check it out right here.